There we go. So hi everybody, this is Steph Unthank from Infinity Wellness, and this is Bridgette. Hi Bridgette.
Hi Steph.
How you doing?
Yeah, good, thank you. And you?
Yeah, really well, thanks. Really good. We're here today, everybody, to bring you a further episode, looking now at episode 7 of the Mind Body Connective. And it's really good to be back today and doing some more filming. So we are going to just have a little look today at a little bit of theory, I guess, around something that I've been looking at quite recently, a book that I've been reading, particularly taken from a guy called Bessel van der Kolk, and he wrote a book about trauma and how trauma shows up in our body, in our emotions, in our thinking. The book is called The Body Keeps the Score. And when I was reading this book, and I use some of the content of this book in terms of maybe when I'm teaching to organisations and companies and what have you, some of the stuff in here is just really relevant, I think, to looking at that broader topic of managing stress. And when we look at stress, I'm talking about this today from a perspective of, you know, minor stress, and then also how that stress builds up over time and can become prolonged stress or even chronic stress. So yeah, I mean, Bridgette, I know you've read the book as well, so it's one of your faves. But yeah, just to maybe just kick us off, I mean, in terms of your thinking around handling long-term stress, I mean, what are your views on that?
Yeah, well, I think it is just that very much that sort of noticing and getting used to noticing that those sort of things are building up over time, which I think it's actually, you know, can be quite difficult. You know, these things can sort of creep up on us. And yeah, well, what sort of tips have you found been really helpful? What do you tend to work with?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, there's a number of things in the previous video cast that we've done. Obviously, you and I have talked quite a lot, haven't we, about paying attention and becoming aware and being really curious about what's going on in our day-to-day in terms of just really understanding how we can shift maybe some of our self-care rituals to looking after ourselves a little bit more. And I know that some of the people that will be watching this video cast today will remember those conversations. So, you know, I could talk again today about, you know, how building in sort of incremental moments into our day-to-day lives, into our day-to-day world, can be really, really useful. And of course, I could talk again about actually doing that slowly and, you know, not trying to do too much too quickly, because that can be really overwhelming and actually causes even more stress than we could actually need at that time. You know, we don't want to be building stress up by giving ourselves more objectives and goals to try and manage. So maybe we'll loop back round to that. But I think when we look at one of the particular things that I wanted to raise today is that when we look at heightened stress over a long period of time or a prolonged period of time, that sometimes it can show up in really different ways, right? So stress, if I was to say to a client or, you know, a friend even, when you're really stressed out, how do you know? I mean, what do you think, Bridgette? What type of response do you get when you're talking to people and working with people, and maybe you're asking that question?
Yeah, it's normally very immediate. I think it's at the end of a particular day. They may not necessarily notice that habit forming over a long time. So I think it will have been a cumulative effect through the day, and they'll have got to the end of the day actually just really not feeling great, or just feeling wiped out, or feeling overwhelmed. But I think looking at whether that is how that's sort of accumulated, I think there's some ignoring that goes on there, certainly with the clients that I've been working with. What about with you? Have you found that to be
Yeah, I think the same. So, you know, I think one of the things that you just said is this kind of so if I ask the question, how do you know when you're faced into a stressful situation? How do you know that you've had a stressful day or a period of stress? The response that generally that I would get is that, oh, well, I just don't feel right. You know, I don't feel good. I don't feel right. But generally people can't quite pinpoint it. And I think some of that is because we don't actually know or understand the symptoms of stress a lot of the time. We don't maybe correlate what's going on for us in a physical sense or an emotional sense or a psychological sense, or even in our behaviours. We don't correlate those things that are taking place with the actual stress that's taking place itself. So, you know, for instance, if for instance we had gone through a day of prolonged stress, you know, something like to some typical kind of life events that take place for so many people, you know, the stress of getting the children ready for school in the morning, the stress of the school run, then the stress of maybe having to, and particularly over the last year or so now, you know, work from a home-based environment with maybe just a little bit of space. You're still at that dining table, you know, and you haven't really got an environment that's conducive to being able to work well. Back-to-back meetings, only a little bit of space for you to take a break or stretch your legs or get some fresh air. And then that kind of groundhog at the end of the day where, you know, you've not really drunk very well or ate very well. Then you're going out and doing the school run, or somebody else is doing the school run and dropping the children back. You know, you've forgotten to take the dog out for a walk. You haven't got anything in for tea that day, so you've got to go to the supermarket. So that just general, it's kind of life stress, right? Life stress, which all of us, as I've said in one of our previous video casts, you know, all of us have moments of stress in our lives that we just deal with, and we just think that it's something we have to put up with, right? We just have to kind of get on with it. And that's kind of that, it's that life stress that kind of teeters along every day, right? And I think that what happens is that over time, when that stress starts to build up, it can then become quite chronic stress, or prolonged periods of stress can build up into chronic stress. And that's when it starts to have a real impact on the person that we're being. So never do I ever ask a question, what does it feel like to be stressed, to then get a response from an individual, whether they're in an audience in a corporate gig that I'm doing, or whether it's a one-to-one client. Never do I ever get a response that when I'm stressed, my thinking turns into worrying, rumination, catastrophizing, getting caught up in negative self-talk, you know, kind of telling myself that I'm no good, that, you know, I haven't got a purpose today, you know. Never do people correlate that kind of those mind traps, let's say, with the fact that they're dealing with a lot of stress in that moment. And then never does anybody respond that emotionally they notice that when they're stressed, they feel angry, or they feel a sense of a downwardness, depressive state. Maybe that they feel a sense of sadness, that they can feel upset, even guilty, they feel hurt, or maybe there's a sense of shame there. So those emotions that can come out when we're in a place of stress as well are not recognizable to people as stress symptoms. And then in the body, I've always found the body, and this book, you know, with Bessel van der Kolk talks about the body keeping the score. When we are, and this is really specific now, when we think about the body keeping the score over long, prolonged periods of stress, we can absolutely see the correlation between the fact that we could have increased pain or increased tension or discomfort of some way, that sometimes IBS can flare up, or we can have prolonged headaches, maybe even feel sick or nauseous, that our muscles can ache, we can get palpitations, we might even feel a bit dizzy or feel a bit faint, cold sweats, hot sweats, indigestion, sweaty palms, because the body, all of those things that I've just talked about, all of those symptoms, is the body's way of telling us that there's something not quite right here. You know, we need to just find some space and some calm to try and bring down those stress levels. And then I think the final thing is about behaviour. And there's other things outside of this, but the final thing I wanted to talk about today was behaviour. You know, when do we maybe see the parallels between the way that we behave and heightened stress? So when do we notice that actually, if somebody's really withdrawn, is that because they're suffering from heightened stress? If somebody's got their head down and they're overworking, is that because they want to block the stress out? So the way to do that is to overwork. You know, if somebody is suspicious, you know, they feel that maybe there's a bit of a conspiracy against them, that's a sign of stress, just as much as if somebody was being really secretive. So there's lots of different behaviours that we can see that come from being quite stressed too. Now there's a couple of just excerpts that I want to just read out for you from the book, The Body Keeps the Score. And just before I do that, I mean, Bridgette, everything that I've just talked about is a lot of information there, right? These thinking, emotions, the body, behaviour. I mean, any kind of thoughts from you on that?
I think just a few things I'd highlight, which I think is, there were sort of three main streams that came through there. I think there is that ignoring and not necessarily correlating what's happening in our bodies with actually what's happening in our moods and our emotions. I think that's a really important one to highlight.
Yeah.
I think also this, maybe didn't use the word, but I sensed there was this sort of bombarding going on, and that can happen. I tend to sort of talk about cumulative, but I think it's very, very similar. This long-term effect, day after day, of doing this sort of behavior to our bodies. We're bombarding our bodies, and we can switch off those signals. And again, we've sort of highlighted that in some of the previous ones, but I think that, so ignoring, bombarding, and then I think you said blocking out, which again I think is a, two sides of that same coin. We're either bombarded with it or we block it out. So I think some really relevant points there, and it is a fascinating book. So back to you now on these excerpts that you're going to share with us.
Well, actually, the first one talks to the point you just made, which is, so one of the things that Bessel talks about is that our bodies are being constantly bombarded, right? Constantly bombarded by visceral warning signs. In an attempt to control these processes, they often become an expert. So we become an expert at ignoring our gut feeling, and we numb that awareness of what's being played out inside. It's amazing, isn't it? Yeah. So we're being bombarded by, those constant visceral warning signs, but yet we choose to ignore them. So some of those things I talked about in the thinking, the emotions, the body, and the behavior, is it about we're ignoring them, or is it just that we're not educated to know that they are connected? I think there's a bit of both, actually. We're good at blocking stuff out because we don't want to face into those challenges, or even admit that we are suffering in any way, but equally there's a little bit of education here. I think people to know that some of these thinking signs, these emotional signs, the way that the body reacts and the way that we behave can very, very much be connected to the way that we feel in terms of our stress levels. And then the second thing he says is that as long as you keep secrets and suppress information, right, you are fundamentally at war with yourself and your body. The critical issue is allowing yourself to know what you know. That takes an enormous amount of courage. Allow yourself to know what you know. And I was just listening to a podcast over the weekend, and it was about well-being, but essentially they were talking about what we're talking about now in a very different way. But there was something about, and we've talked about this, Bridgette, all the way through, awareness, and just creating enough space in your day to become alive to what's going on and allow yourself to know what you know. So I find that that's phenomenal, that quote that I've taken from the book. And then the final one that I picked out, which I really like, is being able to feel safe with other people is probably the single most important aspect of mental health. Safe connections are fundamental to meaningful and satisfying lives. And the reason I picked that one out is because of what we've gone through over the last 12 or 14 months. Yes, I appreciate that we're at that time now where things are starting to creep back to a sense of connectiveness. We're able to see more people, be with more people. But just that quote from Bessel that talks about, being able to feel safe has a huge dependency on being able to be connected to others, and that connection with others can be really meaningful and really satisfying, but it's hugely, hugely impactful on our mental health. So 3 fantastic little quotes there from Bessel that really talk to that point around the body keeping the score. So who'd have thought, right? Who'd have thought that somebody could be feeling real chronic pain, tension, discomfort in their body, IBS symptoms, headaches, and some of that could be manifesting from the fact that they've been separated from the people that they trust and feel that they have a strong relationship with for such a long period of time. And I find that's phenomenal, right? But I think today is about that level of education for us to take it up just a step, just a notch, and to help the people that are listening to this video cast today to make that connection between thinking, emotions, our body and our behaviour, and what that really means in terms of our stress levels, and whether we're managing our stress in the day-to-day, or if actually it's starting to compound, it's prolonged, and therefore could become chronic. What do you think about that?
Oh, well, I think that's very powerful. I think it's very, very useful to have those examples to underpin it. I think anything that we can do to increase our understanding does actually help with our safety and our security and not feeling isolated, because we know that it's a shared understanding with others. And I just love that piece about allowing. So for me, that's around also permission, giving ourselves permission, which I think is a crucial part of this. And back to, again, themes that keep coming through, but responsibility. It's our responsibility to handle this, but we need the information and the knowledge to help us understand that, and then we need to just put that in place. So yeah, I think very powerful.
Brilliant. Well, hopefully to everybody that's watched this video cast, you found that interesting. If there was one thing I was going to say, Bridgette, today, is that next time you notice, or we notice, that we're getting caught up in our thoughts, next time we notice that there's a little bit of emotion going on for us, which is every day, every moment we have some emotion, but if there's some anger there, some sadness, some despair, next time you notice something going on in your body, a little bit of pain, a little bit of muscle ache, a little bit of fatigue, and next time you notice something about your behaviour, just ask yourselves that question: isn't it interesting that I'm noting this? What's that telling me? Isn't it interesting that I'm noticing this? What's that telling me? And no need to spiral into a place of despair, but actually just take that moment to look at how your day's been, and if you can, notice what you might have been able to do differently and make those adjustments for the next day. Just 10 minutes of fresh air, drinking a bit more water, being a bit more active, spending some time, now that we can, with loved ones and relatives, to have those great conversations. But most of all, look after yourselves. And don't forget to click through to YouTube to watch the full episode, and also to like the YouTube clips that you see, the YouTube video cast that you see. Engage with us on YouTube, engage with us on LinkedIn too, obviously, and share the page, share our channel and our content. Thanks so much for being with me today, Bridgette.
You're welcome, Steph. Thank you.
Take care.
And you.